guess that's true, but I also sounds like people got kicked out and that was sad.
Well, there's always going to be a rebel rouser.
Yeah.
took this agenda.
Hello. Okay, got it. How you doing?
How are you? Viva.
Welcome everyone to the Board of Directors of the Redevelopment Agency of Salt Lake City. Today is January 9. I welcome everybody here in person and those that join us online via Facebook, Zoom, or those that are watching through SLC TV. We hope that you will come join us whichever manner you feel more comfortable. As we begin with item A, which is comments, and we begin our meeting with comments to the board. I would like to remind you that written comments may be submitted to the RDA offices via the mail, P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114, or you can email us at council.comments@slcgov.com, or by calling our 24-hour line, 801-535-7654. I am hearing my voice very loudly today, and I'm trying to stay away from this microphone. Thank you for joining us, and before we start now, I want to remind everyone about our rules of decorum, which are in place to ensure that our meetings move along well, that this feels like a comfortable place to share your thoughts, no matter what those are. A copy of those full of rules of decorum are pinned online and in the Zoom link. They're also available outside the door if anybody needs them. If you would like to make general comments today, we are accepting comments in person, online, via Zoom. Scott Corpenny from our staff will moderate our Zoom and will message you with questions about your registration. If you do not wish to speak to our staff, please select Scott. If you do wish to speak to I'm going to start. This is one of those days. If you do not need to speak to our staff, please select Scott from the list of participants. If you need to contact our staff, please raise your hand. Staff is handling a lot of tasks at the same time, so minimize your contact with the staff to technical issues and minimal information updates. Taylor Hill and our staff will be calling those who wish to comment based on the order that received the cards and the names. If you are on Zoom, please unmute your microphone when Taylor calls your name. We will now open our general comment period. Taylor, please start with our first comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have one person registered for general comment. That will be Frederick Jenry, who's here in person.
Good afternoon. My name is Frederick Jenny. I'm a resident of District 4 for about 7 years now, a systems engineer, and I have a passion for urbanism and rail transit. Today I want to speak about the East-West Divide, Rio Grande Plan, and our public transit. According to Salt Lake City Transportation Division, East-West Divide is our greatest transportation problem right now. Although there are two major barriers, both the railroad tracks and I-15, I believe the railroad tracks are our biggest barrier. The reason I say that is because in the future there could be up to almost 800 crossings per day. That's because of the inland port, expansion of Front Runner, and so on. Additionally, with the rail yard closing, not really being used anymore, it's an unnecessary scar in our city. What can be done to fix this? The city knows about the citizen proposal for the Rio Grande Plan, and that an engineering cost and impact analysis has already been conducted by Salt Lake City's transportation. Rio Grande Plan should be carried forward by the city as the primary solution for this east-west divide, with other solutions coming later in the reconnecting communities study. That's because the state needs to be able to have a plan to move forward, so funding can be added and lobbied for. Quickly regarding the cost and the return on investment, it is impossible to argue that a similarly priced I-15 rebuild will be able to repay for itself better than I believe the Rio Grande Plan can. In conclusion, I encourage the city to lobby the state of Utah for money to move forward the Rio Grande Plan to the next phase of development, and for the RDA to consider the Rio Grande Plan in its plans and renderings. Thank you.
Thank
that
you, Taylor.
was the final registered commenter.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. Is anybody else wishes to comment? Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for providing your comment. We have no public hearings today, and we do have some redevelopment agency business, and our first item is the election of the chair and the vice chair, and we are going to go through that. Ballots are being passed right now about the chair and the vice chair for this year.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, are we nominating and discussing first, or?
There's no requirement that the board nominate someone, but that has been the practice in the past, is to nominate someone, or someone can self-nominate.
Mr. Chair, I nominate Board Member Pui to continue serving as chair.
Second. Or we're not doing that in close in work sessions. I agree.
And you would vote with the ballots that are in front of you, and then Cindy Lou will read those off. I think in the past, we've also given the person who's nominated a minute to speak if they would like.
Like as if they need to hear me more. But thank you. I don't know if there is any other nominations. I feel like that would be fair to just, since there was a nomination. Is there any other nominations on the table? You know, I learned a great deal in this last year in this position, and the amount of learning never stops, and it's one of the amazing challenges of what we do here, but I enjoyed the amount of information and learning possibilities I had, and the influence that this position allows us to further good policy. So I appreciate the nomination, and I'm looking forward to stay as chair of the RDA. How do we do this? Do we pass it to you?
So, board members, if you could write your names and your vote, I will walk them over to Cindy. We will go through the results.
We give them to you.
Oh, in fact, it's a secret. We read our name off in a second.
Thank you. So on the vote for RDA chair election, Alejandro Poi voted for himself. Board member Dugan voted for board member Poi. Board member Petro also voted for board member Poi. Board member Young voted for board member Poi. Board member Wharton voted for board member Poi. Board member Mano also for board member Poi. And board member Lopez Chavez also for board member Poi. So it's unanimous election.
Thank you. We're going to vice chair now.
Go off that.
Well, I'm going to nominate board member Mono for vice chair.
Second.
Thank you, board member Petro and Dugan and Pui. And Mr. Chair, I am honored for the nomination. RDA is actually the part of the city that first got me into this building while serving on the RDA Redevelopment Advisory Committee. I don't even know how many years ago now, a long time ago. And I'm excited to, it's been great to be a board member. I'm excited to go into leadership and to continue working even closer with the RDA. So thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Board member Lopez Chavez voted for board member Mano. Board member Mano also for himself, board member Mano. Board member Young for board member Mano. Board member Petro for board member Mano. Board member Wharton for board member Mano. Board member Poi also for board member Mano. And board member Dugan for board member Mano. So it is unanimous.
Thank you.
Habemos por, vice chair then. Thank you. Congratulations, board member Mano. Do we need to do anything else on that item? I think that's.
We need an official motion.
As the RDA, it's just we need a motion to ratify the election results of the chair and the vice chair leadership. It's just a motion.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we elect board member Pui as chair, board member Mano as vice chair, or do we have to do separate? As vice chair.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by board member Dugan and a second by board member Petro. I'm going to call the question. And board member Young?
Aye.
Board member Petro?
Aye.
Board member Wharton?
Aye.
Board member Dugan?
Yes.
Board member Lopez Chavez?
Aye.
Board member Mano?
Yes.
And I'm an aye as well, so that motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item 2, C2, open meetings law training. We're going to have a little training from Allison Parks. Thank you. Now you can take it on.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. I think there is a presentation.
You do need to just check your mic light if you could
Oh.
confirm that it's green.
Can you hear me okay?
That's better. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy Lou. All right, good afternoon. My name is Allison Parks. This is your annual Open and Public Meetings Act training. I'm a senior city attorney in the attorney's office. I've been there for 7 years and have been the primary counsel for the RDA for the past 4 years. So today we're just going to go over a high-level overview of the Open and Public Meetings Act. My goal today is just to remind some of you, educate some of you on this law, and hopefully entertain you a little bit. This year's theme is cat gifts. I've moved away from dog gifts, and it's hard for me to admit because I am a dog person, but the cat gifts are way better. So should have gone there in the first place. All right, so and as I go through this, if you all have any questions, please raise your hand, interrupt me, let me know if what I'm saying doesn't make any sense. All right, so next slide, please. All right, so the Open and Public Meetings Act is a state law. As I go through this, I'll use the acronym OPMA because Open and Public Meetings Act is a lot to say. But the general spirit of the law is to ensure that public bodies, such as yourself, that conduct the public's business, do so in an open and transparent way, and that your deliberations are done openly. So as we go through the presentation, I'm going to hopefully we'll answer 3 questions today. One is, what does the law apply to? The second, when does the law apply? And the third, if the law applies, what are the requirements of the law? So next slide, please. So this is our guiding statement that we'll work throughout the presentation. So OPMA says that generally, meetings of a public body are open to the public unless an exception allows the meeting to be closed. Next slide. So the first question is, what does the law apply to? The law applies to public bodies. We don't need to belabor this too much because you all are a public body. So next slide. So the next question is, when does the law apply? The law applies to meetings. So meetings of a public body are to be open. And the law defines meetings to be a convening of at least a quorum to discuss, receive comment, or act on a matter that you all have decision-making authority or jurisdiction over. And when we look at this definition of meeting, we'll go into this in the next slide, but it's just a very broad definition of what a meeting is. Meeting is obviously this meeting that we're here in today. This is a very traditional public meeting, but the law is broad enough that it covers a variety of different kinds of meetings. So next slide, please. So a meeting can also be an electronic meeting, and we could think of that as a Zoom meeting, a WebEx meeting, but that could also be a meeting like in an email or text message. So think carefully when you're having electronic communications. Is there a quorum? Are you a quorum of this public body? Are you all talking about things that you have advisory power over? If that's the case, that might be considered a meeting and the requirements of OPMA may apply. So think carefully about when you all are talking as a quorum about the public's business and what context you're doing that in. OPMA also applies to retreats and workshops, field trips, but there are some exceptions under the law. So the law allows for you all to have social gatherings, like holiday parties, chance meetings. If there's no quorum, that's not considered a meeting. But again, the law is hoping that the discussions are deliberate and transparent. And so please don't use these exceptions to the law to circumvent the purpose of the law. Right? So next question, or next slide, question. All right, so the requirements of OPMA, again, it requires transparency to the public. So the first 2 questions we've already answered. What does the law apply to? It applies to public bodies. The next question, when does it apply? It applies to meetings. And so now we're getting to the part where, well, what does the law actually require? So when we're having public body meetings, what does the law require? So next slide. So the law requires 2 general things. If it's a public bodies meeting, it requires public notice, and it requires a recording or record of the meeting. And so there's a variety of ways that public notice is provided. So the first is for every meeting that you have, you provide public notice of the agenda of your meeting and the time, place, and date of each meeting. And the agenda has to be it has sufficient detail to give people notice that they might want to come to the meeting. Like, for example, if your agenda just has just says that there's going to be a rezone discussed and I'm looking at the agenda item, I might not have enough information about what that rezone is. But if the agenda item says that the rezone is taking place at right next to my house, and maybe they want to rezone from a residential to commercial, that's enough information to give me notice about whether I want to attend the meeting or not. So the agenda again has to give reasonable specificity about what's going to be discussed in the meeting. All right, next slide. All right, so in addition to every meeting, if the public body meets regularly, such as you all, you also have to publish your annual meeting. This is generally done of January of each year, and that's already been done for you, so we don't need to go into too many details on that. Next slide. All right, emergency meetings. So an emergency meeting is essentially an exception to the 24-hour notice rule. So again, each meeting that you have to give 24-hour notice, but if it's an emergency meeting, you can have a meeting without giving that 24-hour notice. But again, it has to be an emergency. It has to be this unforeseen circumstance that requires immediate consideration. So basically saying there's no way that we could give 24-hour notice. In addition to meeting that pretty high bar that it has to be something that needs immediate consideration, you can't hold an emergency meeting unless you attempt to notify all members of the body and at least a majority of the body agree to have an emergency meeting. Any questions so far? I feel like I'm flying through this. No? All right. Next slide, please. All right, so just FYI, the public notice is posted in a variety of places. It's on the Utah Public Notice website, on the City and RDA Board's website, and at a public location. This is just a slight change in the law from years past where we used to be required to publish in a newspaper of general circulation. That's not a requirement anymore because we're kind of evolving away from newspapers, I guess. Okay, next slide. All right, so I will briefly touch on electronic meetings. Next slide, please. All right, so there's two types of electronic meetings. There's an electronic meeting with an anchor location and an electronic meeting without an anchor location. So this meeting right here that we're having could be considered an electronic meeting with an anchor location. There's an electronic meeting element of the meeting, but we've provided this public space for the public to come and meet and discuss and give public comment. This is considered an anchor location. But if you remember during the days of COVID, we could also have an electronic meeting without an anchor location. So meaning that everything is done electronically online. There's no public space for people to. But there's a requirement that the chair has to make a determination that if we're not going to have an anchor location, have to make a determination that meeting in person presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those present at the anchor location, or the location where the public body would meet is unsafe. And then there's additional requirements that the chair's determination has to be supported by facts and give information about how the public can meet electronically. And that determination only lasts for 30 days. So just meeting without an anchor location, that determination only lasts 30 days. All right, next slide, please. All right, so when we're talking again about the requirements of OPMA, it requires public notice for the meetings, but it also requires records of the meetings. So Cindy Lou and her team does a great job of keeping records of our meetings. So there are both written and recorded minutes of open meetings as well as closed meetings. There are some exceptions to keeping records in closed meetings, and those are very limited to when we're discussing things such as the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual, or some security conversations. All right, next slide. Okay, so going back to our guiding principle, so meetings of a public body are generally open unless an exception applies that allows the meeting to be closed. So let's talk about closed meetings briefly. Next slide. All right, so we can close a meeting to discuss only specified topics. Next slide. So here is a list of reasons. I'm not going to read through them, and hopefully you can see them better on your screens than on that big screen. But again, generally, your discussions need to be open in a public meeting unless one of these exceptions applies that allows you to close the meeting. And we can only discuss these specified topics in a closed meeting. Otherwise, it needs to be discussed in an open meeting. And so there are special processes that you need to follow when closing a meeting. So next slide, please. So the first thing is you have to start in an open meeting. In other words, you can't start a public meeting as a closed meeting. You always have to start as an open meeting. And then there must be 2/3 vote to approve to close the open meeting. And as you're closing it, you need to publicly announce the reasons for closing the meeting, the location of the meeting, and the roll call vote by name. So as you're going into closed meeting, you have to announce your name and your vote for whether to close the meeting. All right, next slide. Oh, sorry, one other thing I wanted to say about closed meetings. Sorry, can we go back? So as you're announcing the reasons for closing the meeting, there might be more than one reason to close the meeting. And if you're going to talk about different topics in the closed meeting, you need to announce those different topics in the meeting, or else you can't talk about them. So for example, if you close a meeting to talk about a lawsuit related to feral cats in the city, and you're closing it for the reason of pending litigation, that's all you can talk about in the closed meeting. You then can't talk about in closed meeting some sort of budget amendment, right? That I don't think that's an exception to an open meeting, and you didn't announce it beforehand. So, all right, next slide. All right, so OTMA also touches briefly on public comment and participation during open meetings. Next slide. So OTMA it doesn't require that you have public comment and participation. Usually other separate state laws or city ordinances have requirements about having public hearings or public participation. OTMA just briefly touches on how public comment may be received and what may be discussed during a public meeting. So whether you have public comment or not, if it's not required under a separate state law, it's at the discretion of the chair. If someone makes a comment that you as a board want to talk about, you can talk about it even if it's not on the agenda. You just can't take any final action on that issue that was raised during public comment. All right, next slide, please. OTMA also briefly touches on disruptions of meetings, and it says that you all may remove someone from a meeting if they're willfully disrupting the conduct of the meeting is seriously compromised. This might not be a great example of a meeting being seriously compromised, because I was in a meeting earlier today where a cat was sitting in front of a screen and we were able to continue the meeting. So it's a pretty high bar. It has to seriously disrupt your ability to continue the meeting. All right, next slide, please. All right, consequences. Next slide, please. So if you willfully violate the closed meeting provisions of OTMA, that may be considered a Class B misdemeanor. So it's very serious to follow the rules of the closed meetings and of OTMA. In addition, private individuals can bring a lawsuit challenging whether you followed OTMA or not. So if they feel like you haven't properly noticed a meeting, or maybe they are challenging your reason for closing a meeting, they could bring a lawsuit challenging the final action that was made in that meeting. They only have a limited period of time to make that challenge, but that is an option that the public does have. All right, next slide. Yeah, I think that's it. So, yeah, do you guys have any questions, comments? Did you love the cat gifts?
I was about to comment on your cat gift, so thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that a lot. So the quiz part starts now, right?
I actually thought about doing a quiz part and like handing out little cats, and I was like, that's weird and too much. So next year.
Thank you for that. That's a good reminder of the law and why is this important to keep transparency and for the public. And so thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. And you might not have any questions today, but please know that the attorney's office is here to support you and answer any other questions that you may have. Hey, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, thank you so much for paying close attention to this. Board members, item C3, we're going to move on to the RDA audit review and approval of the fiscal year 2022-2023. Danny is not coming to the table, and Mary Beth Thompson, Mike, I'm gonna keep on naming names until someone shows up. Michael Michelson from Eddie and Bailey, and Paul Skeen from Eddie and Bailey, or anybody?
Mr. Chair, I wonder if because we're running ahead of schedule, if they are not here yet, but I will message Mary Beth and see where they are.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break then. Thank you.
This is just a brief test.
Okay. Well, we are going to be starting the meeting yet again. Thank you for the patience, your patience while we have all the people here. Moving on to the agenda item C3, RDA audit review and approval of fiscal year 2022-2023. Coming to the table, Mary Beth Thompson, Chief Financial Officer for Salt Lake City, Michael Michelson from Eddie and Bailey, and Paul Skeen. No? Okay, this is it. You can take it on. Thank you.
So I will just do a quick introduction. This is Mike Mickelson. He is a Bailey auditor. He did the RDA audit. As well as our single audit. So he will just be discussing the RDA audit today.
Thank you, Mary Beth, and thank you for having me here. I'm sorry I have my old man glasses on. I can see you all now. As was stated in the introduction, I am the engagement partner that was the partner for the audit of the redevelopment agency. I'll be back in February to talk about the single audit as well, but today we're talking about the RDA. We issued our report dated December 15th, and I hope that you have that in your packets. It was provided electronically. I believe we owe you some hard copies still, but I know that electronic gets disseminated quicker, so we got that to you. And I believe you need to approve and have this report before you do anything with it anyway. With that, we issued 2 documents. Our auditor's report is in the big one, and that is the only thing that really belongs to us. Along with that, we issued a letter that's required when there's a board charged with governance like this board, and so that has some required communications. But I'm going to start with our auditor's report. So that's on pages 2 and 3 and goes over onto page 4 in the packet with the financial statements, if you have that on your devices. We issued an unmodified opinion. So it's a clean opinion that says that the financial statements are fairly presented in relation to generally accepted accounting principles. The auditor's report talks about the responsibility of management for the financial statements, and management is responsible for the internal controls, for determining estimates, and for doing anything else related to the financial statements, and for their fair presentation, and so for the day-to-day accounting and all those issues. The section for us is a little bit longer to just describe what we do. There's some bullet points there, but we exercise our professional judgment through the course of the audit in performing our audit procedures and maintain professional skepticism. So we have a very good working relationship with the city and its accounting department because that's who we go to get the information we need for the audit, even though you're the ones that hire us and that we report to. That's who we work with during the course of the audit. And we have a very good working relationship, but we are required to maintain professional skepticism, kind of similar to what President Reagan talked about with a trust but verify. There are very good people in the accounting department here at the city, but we still have to do our procedures under the assumption that something could happen. And that leads us into our risk assessment. So when we're planning our audits, the second bullet point there under our responsibilities is to do a risk assessment of the entity that we're auditing. And that deals with the risk of misstatement of the financial statements due to fraud or error, as well as the design of the internal controls. And so we look at those areas, the transactions, the financial statement line items we'll be opining on, the internal controls, and we do our risk assessment. The third bullet point talked about internal control, that we gain an understanding of, and we document that in our work papers, and that helps us design our audit procedures. We also look at the appropriateness of accounting policies selected and used by management, as well as the reasonableness of the development of significant estimates. So most of the numbers in a financial statement are some form of an estimate, some being more significant than others. What makes something significant is the subjectiveness going into determining that, and the number of assumptions and how much work. We don't consider depreciation to be a significant estimate, for example, because you take the cost of the asset divided by what you estimate the useful life to be, and that's the annual depreciation. That's a pretty simple estimate. Things that are more significant are the pension liability, because that's an actuarially determined number, and that's provided by Utah Retirement Systems. So we do some work around that by obtaining that report from Utah Retirement Systems. We look at, they receive a service and organization control report that details the internal controls there over the information provided to the entities that participate in Utah Retirement. So we obtain all that information. They provide the actuarial report, and they provide their ACFR and what we refer to as an 805 report, but that's the report where they allocate the liability among all the different government entities and other entities that participate there. And we do some procedures over that to make sure that the city is properly reporting their pension liability. And a piece of that gets allocated to the RDA. And so at the city level, stealing thunder from maybe our next meeting, we also audit how that's allocated among the departments in the city. And so that's where it becomes important for the redevelopment agency is we've looked at that at the macro level as it's provided to the city, and then we've looked at it at more of a micro level as it's been allocated among the departments and determining that estimate to be appropriate in arriving at our opinion. So the other item there, it's not listed as a bullet point, but it is listed in the paragraph above, deals with materiality. And so at the beginning of our audit and planning our audit procedures, we establish a materiality threshold. And that's based on our judgment, and we think that a misstatement above that threshold will change a financial statement user's judgment if that statement remains in the financial statements. So then we plan our audit to detect any material misstatement or any misstatement above that threshold, whether due to fraud or error. There's a potential for misstatements below that threshold to exist and not be caught by us because we are looking for materials above that threshold. We believe that a misstatement below that threshold won't change a user's judgment. Now, frequently we'll find misstatements below that threshold, and if we do, we're required to report them. So they would be in the letter that I'll go over next, but there weren't any in the redevelopment agency this year. The final bullet point there is that we do a quick assessment or a longer one, depending on the risk, if necessary, about the going concern of the entity. And of course, being a government entity and having the ability to tax and being supported by those taxes, there's very little chance of there being a going concern issue with the redevelopment agency. Okay, in our auditor's report, the next section refers to required supplementary information. So the standard setting body, Government Accounting Standards Board, requires some additional information with the financial statements. And in this case, it's the pension schedules that are provided as RSI. We do not audit those. And so this paragraph at the bottom of page 3 is just letting financial statement readers know that we have not audited them, but we've done some small procedures or limited procedures in comparing those statements to the financial statements and to the documentation we receive for the financial statements and making sure that we can say that they're fairly stated in relation to the financial statements. And so that information that we get from Utah Retirement Systems, we get a confirmation, the city gets their information, and we compare those to make sure that the disclosures in the footnotes and in those supplemental schedules are correct and fairly stated. Finally, the last paragraph deals with some supplementary information. There are 3 schedules at the back that are provided as supplementary. They're not required. but there are additional information that the RDA provides for different financial statement users. It's a combining statement of net position by project area, as well as a combining statement of revenues and expenses and changes in net position by project area, and then a schedule of selected financial information by project area. So they break out some of the information, the financial statements by project area, in those 3 schedules at the back. Those are not required, and so they're called supplemental information instead of required supplemental information, and we provide about the same level of assurance on that. We have tied those back to the financial statements to make sure that they agree and to say that we believe they're fairly stated in relation to the financial statements taken as a whole. So that is what belongs to us. The rest of that long document is the financial statements. That's the culmination of the financial transactions of the redevelopment agency over the year ended June 30, 2023. We did not have significant, well, we didn't have any, I guess I can say, any audit adjustments. So that information is consistent with what you have reviewed as you've performed your responsibilities over the course of 2020. So unless you want this meeting to go very long, I'm not going to go through that information since you've seen it and reviewed it, and it hasn't changed. The format might be a little bit different because this is a format that meets generally accepted accounting principles, but the information there hasn't changed.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was going to get into my letter still too, unless you have questions now. I'm sorry. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just had one question related to the URS component.
Okay.
So I appreciate the liability that exists there, and there are some unforeseen kind of market factors that could be impacting that.
Absolutely.
Do you feel that the risk assumed by the city is more or less or equivalent to any of the other public entities that participate in that retirement system?
No, I don't. As a firm, we audit Utah retirement systems too, and I don't know that I should speak to that audit to this group. I don't know that that would be appropriate. However, we do provide that audit opinion, and in the procedures that we perform at the city, in tying out to the 805 report and the allocation made by Utah retirement systems among the different entities, we don't feel that you bear an unproportionate share. Now, their ACFR will disclose that that liability is allocated based on the contributions of each government. And so the state has its portion, the city has its portion, the counties have their portion, all based on the different contributions that they make to that retirement system.
Great, thank you.
And so that's how it's allocated. The just so you're aware, the required contributions that allocation is based on are determined by the actuaries hired by Utah Retirement Systems. So they're actuarially determined contributions.
Great. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. That's a great question. Are there other questions I can answer now, or should I?
Continue.
Okay, I'll continue with what I had planned then. Okay, so the next thing, I remember what I was going to say. So behind those financial statements are some footnotes, and you probably don't get those during the course of the year. Those footnotes just explain in a more narrative format, as opposed to a tabular format like the financial statements, some information that's in the financial statements themselves. So for example, we'll go back to that pension footnote. It's several pages long, talking about the actuarial assumptions and some of the things that go into developing that estimate that comes from Utah retirement systems. So financial statement users have that information and background. And so at your leisure, you can read those those footnotes if you want to. But it's a more narrative discussion of some of the line items in the financial statements. Footnote 1 talks about the accounting policies that have been selected by management that are used. And as I mentioned earlier in one of those bullet points, we look at those and make sure that they're appropriate and being implemented appropriately. So the highlights of the additional letter, the required communications, would be the significant accounting estimates. I've already talked about one of them being the net pension liability. The second one that we consider to be significant is the allowance for doubtful accounts. The redevelopment agency has made millions, tens of millions of dollars worth of loans. And when you make loans like that, there's a responsibility to assess those loans for collectability. And when you think there's a portion of, or some portion of those loans that might not be collected for whatever reason, GAAP requires that there be an allowance established against those loans. And so that's a significant estimate because that's a difficult estimate to come up with. So management has made their assumptions. We reviewed their assumptions in developing that estimate and determined that we believe their estimate of the allowance for doubtful loans or allowance for doubtful accounts is appropriate and fairly stated in all material respects. So those are the two things that we think are the most significant estimates in the financial statements of the redevelopment agency. We did not have any significant difficulties encountered with the audit. The timing was slower than everybody wanted. We can talk about the issues surrounding that, but the timing wasn't so significant that we consider that to be a significant difficulty. The difficulty would be something more along the lines if the documentation we were provided wasn't appropriate or wasn't complete or something like that. So in this case, the timing we don't consider to be a significant difficulty. There's a disclosure there that there were no uncorrected or corrected misstatements, so that's where that's in writing if you want that. The final thing I'll highlight there is that we obtained a representation letter from management that bears the date of our auditor's report. Those two things have to be dated the same thing. But that is a formal document that formalizes the representations made to us during the course of the audit. That's the last audit procedure that we have in completing our audit. So management makes a number of representations to us during the course of the audit. We start by receiving a trial balance from them. And so they're representing to us that the trial balance is complete and they've made all the adjustments to it. We ask for certain information, and so they're representing to us that the information they provided to us is complete and appropriate and accurate. So that letter just formalizes a lot of those representations that are made during the course of the audit, and we obtain that at the end of the audit. It would be a problem if we didn't obtain it, but we obtained it with no problem. It bears the same date as the report, but I just want you to be aware that management has signed that and put themselves on the hook for that as well. So are there any other questions I can answer for you at this point?
Board members? Okay. Thank you so much for the work. Yep. And I appreciate the work of auditors like yourself and looking into this for the sake of the taxpayers and you know our work. And so thank you so much for the presentation and for the work on this audit.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me to provide this information to you.
Thank you.
So have a good meeting.
Board members, we're moving on to item C5, where item C4 has been pulled from the agenda. We're going to the informational City Creek daylighting design plan along Folsom Trail. Coming to the table, Lauren Parisi, Senior Project Manager, and Bradley Krause, Chart Consultant with CRSA. I am sure I destroyed that last name. I apologize. Please help me do it better next time.
How do you pronounce your last name? Kraushar?
Kraushar.
Okay, yeah. Great.
And please speak very close to the microphones. Those microphones don't push.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'd like to give most of the time to Bradley today, the designer from CRSA, who was the consultant team that we worked with this project on, and he'll dive into the details of the plan. But I did want to briefly talk about the public engagement that happened as a part of this project. And so just as a little bit of background, the City Creek Daylighting Design Plan that we recently completed builds off the feasibility study that was done in 2020, which identified multiple concepts for daylighting the creek or bringing City Creek to the surface along Folsom Trail between approximately 700 West and 1000 West. Just south of North Temple. So this project has taken that concept from the feasibility study to preliminary design and construction drawings. So that's where we're at. In terms of community engagement, this was done in phases in partnership with local nonprofit Seven Canyons Trust, whose mission it is to daylight creeks all across the valley. And so the first phase of engagement involved a survey regarding how individuals were currently using the trail and what sort of amenities they wanted to see in conjunction with the creek. Of the 265 surveys collected, people prioritized seating, lighting, trash receptacles, public art, and really emphasized the importance of increased safety along the trail. Something interesting was that over half of their respondents actually had never used the trail, so we're hoping that this project really increases its use. We then put out a visual preference activity for people to select the type and style of amenities that they preferred, which the consultants then reviewed as a part of their design process. People prioritized creative seating design, natural play spaces, native plantings, and a plaza for potential events. We also held a stakeholder forum with 18 local experts in water, community, and recreation to review preliminary design themes. The group was really drawn towards a mix of urban industrial design that pays homage to the former rail corridor in the area and also a modern greenway. And again, which the consultants took into consideration with the design that you'll see. And then the draft design concepts were ultimately put back out to the public this past August and for additional feedback, and people supported the enhanced green spaces, trees, especially in terms of providing shade along the trail, native vegetation, and again, the seating areas so people can kind of convene there. So with that, I'll let Bradley take it away.
Thanks. First of all, thanks for scheduling us after a financial audit. Very generous of you. So this will be, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so, just go through a high-level design overview. Obviously, this was months and months, so we can't get into all of it, but kind of survey what was designed, where we are now, and then open it up to any questions. So next. Next. So the context, which Lauren described, you can see where the project site is there. It's part of a larger aquatic network coming up from City Creek. Next. The context also includes prior design work done on the trail. I think we know there's a little bit of trail there already. So this project's kind of picking that up, as Lauren alluded to. Next. And so this is a shot of what the site more or less looks like now. It's maybe 6 months old or whatever. So there's a little bit of work that's been done, clearly a lot more work that needs to be done. This is looking obviously to the west. There's the kind of the furthest segment by Folsom Street. There's these kind of two half segments kind of in the middle ground. And then just out of view below the, out of screen below the drone is where the plaza segment would be. Next. So the design, next. Really focused around the daylighting of the creek. So this is a kind of a system diagram. You know, water's coming out of the mountain. There's a diversion point from the existing drainage system. Water comes by the site and that's being pumped through this segment. Next. So that's kind of the defining element, is a thread of water coming through this linear park. And so with the conceptual idea that the water that's on this project originating in the mountains, there's, you know, how does water come up in this project, you know, and how does it flow through it? And the idea is, the kind of the conceptual underpinning is this idea of a mountain pond at the headwaters and then a cascade and then a stream passing through the site. So On the lower portion of the screen to the right, there's a pond where water, that will be where water originates on the project. There'll be a small pond with a cascade, which has a functional purpose of aerating the water, but it's also kind of the origin of the water on this project. And then building off the feasibility study, there will be a stream channel that then flows west throughout the rest of it. So this is just kind of the major underpinning. This is a creek daylighting project, and so this is the major thread that flows through, literally and figuratively, the project. Next. Additionally, this is also an old rail corridor, so now looking a little bit more at the on-site design, there's just lots of inspiration from the form and the function of the rail system, whether it's rail tracks or the cars themselves. There's primarily a container car shipping area, so that just the patterns of that. And we tried to incorporate that kind of historical use in addition or over the top of or in conjunction with the water element that flows through this. Next. What you end up seeing here are the three segments. Obviously, we're pretty zoomed out at this level. They kind of have three flavors to them. The main segment on the left has the most businesses adjacent to it. It's anticipated that it'll be the most used. The middle two half segments are a little bit more meant to be a little bit more passive, places where, you know, the vegetation is a little bit more at the foreground. It's a little bit less active, more of a transit segment. And then there's the plaza at the end, which is definitely an anchor to destination. It's literally, you know, it's where the sight lines all end at the highway. It's the largest space. It's kind of the anchor at the end, kind of a draw pulling people through the linear segments. Next. So this is just a zoom in. There's lots of details in this. I think it makes sense to kind of keep moving through all of this and then circle back if you guys have any specific questions. So there's a lot going on in here. That's what all the labels are for. I think we can say that the idea is to work with the existing path, work with a lot of the existing constraints, and then try and put in as many amenities and features, focusing around kind of that blue-green ribbon that's flowing through the project. There's actually a fair amount of lateral constraints that happen on this project. It's just not as wide a space as you might think. So having an existing path, there's actually a fair amount of grade change, and then also putting in what we want to be a functional kind of aquatic ecosystem there along the side. You end up with not quite as much space as you want. That having been said, I think we tried to incorporate places for people to sit, for people to wait, and really a diversity of experiences so that if somebody wants to be going through this on a bike at high speed, somebody wants to be stopping and relaxing kind of away from themselves on their own, and a multitude of other potential uses, as many of those as are possible are accommodated in here. Next. This is just a conceptual cross-section through this portion of the project, kind of showing on the left is Folsom Street and on the right is this new stream channel. The reason why there's a big mound in there is there's an existing culvert that was installed as part of the storm drainage. It's unmovable. It's actually quite high in elevation. So, you know, I don't think we'd elect for this if we were starting from scratch, but it's the constraints that we're given. And so this is kind of showing how there's some stadium seating elements on either side of the main path to kind of work with that grade change, but make it kind of an asset more than a liability. And just some of the other amenities in cross-section. Next. This is the middle two half sections, a little bit more of a pass-through, a little bit more focus on kind of a placid, calm experience. So more about the vegetation, allowing the stream to kind of come to the front, not being distracted with, you know, as many other alternative features, having seating areas that are adjacent to the water to engage with it kind of in different ways, whether you want to sit and maybe hear it, walk by it. There's even a small little footbridge on the right side. You can see there's a path, you know, kind of trying to find a way for people to engage in it. You're not just always looking from a distance, just multiple ways to engage with the daylighted creek. Next. This is the plaza segment, the last one. And this is meant to be the focal point of the project. Bunch of constraints, the railroad tracks, the overhead highway, some existing topography, the location where the water will be pumped onto the site. But the idea is for there to be a couple different main components of the plaza, and again, trying to take things, constraints, and turn them into assets of the project. So there's a main entry area that could be flexible for things like farmers markets, just events, things where you might want to use just kind of a blank stage for different reasons. There's an area to the north with some movable furniture that would be in the style of kind of railroad tie benches along movable rails that would be laid in. So kind of giving people the ability to engage with the furniture and move it. It's been successful on a lot of kind of notable landscape architecture projects. Again, the centerpiece binding this together is the main pond, the cascade where the water's coming down and entering into the project, and then kind of a main kind of signature bridge, even though it looks small on the screen. That's maybe, I think, 30, 40 feet long. It's meant to go over it, so it's really meant to be the place where you can kind of walk, stop, and really see where this water's originating. There's a restroom on there, there's bike racks, there's little alcoves for seating, there's different paving materials, there's the intent to put reclaimed rail embedded into the paving in a manner to kind of, again, reference the historic use. But again, this is just a high level single image to look at that. Next.
Quick question right there. Are you planning to, this is where the water, and this plaza is where the water starts for the whole, okay. So we're gonna do some sort of pipe under 800 West right there?
Correct.
So we're gonna have to break the new street that we...
My understanding is that you'd be able to bore underneath.
Okay,
one of the major technical constraints of this project is it is flat. I mean, nature doesn't really do flat, but this is as close to flat as a billiard table. I think the overall grade change on the whole project is something in the order of 18 inches across 800 feet, which is generally flat. And so the attempt with having kind of a built-up cascade and a pond is to get even inches to flow the water without using pumps. We purposely avoided additional complexity, things that might require ongoing maintenance. And so one of our sub-consultants focused more on the river channel, spent time, for the level of development for this scope and fee to analyze that drainage to make sure without any pumps or anything like that, that water will flow across the entire project.
And follow up, what is the expectation on this very small, I mean, the pond is big, but the stream is very small during the winter. Is it that continues? Is it, because in City Creek, they still have some of the water, still flowing in some way because it's naturally flowing here. But the pumps will be shut down in the winter or not? What is the expectation? I mean, this is all of these images and renderings. We're talking about summer, right? When most people are going to be there. But what is the expectation for the other biggest season we have, which is the frozen one?
There is a base flow. This is being pumped. This is kind of a hybrid natural and man-made system. And so the pumps that will bring the water from the existing circulation system and bring them into the site has an anticipated base flow. Don't have it off the top of my head. I think it's in the order of a handful of cubic feet per second that will always be there. Now, the nature of this portion of the project was not to pin down, the exact additional amplitude that may come with storm events, but in general, this is going to be a relatively controlled water feature where it's dictated by a pump. And so I can't speak to what will happen with the continuous water flowing, whether it will freeze and stop, and it'll be like a river you might see in the mountains where the top is frozen and it's continuing to travel underneath. That would be my expectation, but that's the best response that I have for you right now.
Thank you.
And going on with that question, and the pump in the pond here, or is it pump at the diversion point where it separates, because above this was a diversion that went directly west and then in the south to this pond. Is that where you're talking about the pump?
Yeah, there's the main line. It's a little bit north of this project, a couple blocks, I apologize. And then there's a line that comes much closer to this, over kind of near the overpass portion of this. And there's actually an existing feature there, that like a manhole or some sort of concrete kind of access point, and building off of that, you know, a number of feet, you know, 20, 30 feet to get over to the pond. That's the area where the pump and kind of the connection to the existing system would occur.
And throughout the years, has water always flowed through there, or does it dry up in the August, September timeframe?
My understanding is that it always flows through there.
There's always water flowing through there.
It's not always a lot, but there is a base flow.
But there is a base flow.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I'll keep going. I know. So these are a couple cross sections of the main plaza. Just kind of showing you, you know, there on the top one, you can see this idea of a main bridge to cross the stream channel, some different features. You can see the wooden benches there that are meant to move, and then just another cross section on the bottom kind of showing you how that cascade may feed the pond, that there's a little bit of an overlook, and just giving kind of a rhythm to what this area will look like. I think one thing that we'd like to do is introduce a whole bunch of trees. You know, speaking of comfort in seasons, thinking about all the seasons is really important, and getting people out in the hotter weather, you need to shade them, and the most effective long-term solution for shade is trees. And so I think, you know, it's not necessarily something we'd highlight in this, but the idea of introducing as much of an urban canopy as possible in this and planting as many trees as possible, it's the best way to do it. It's more cost effective than structures, it's more pleasing, ecosystem benefits, stuff like that. Next. So this is just a little, you know, graphic showing kind of the design inspiration of the different materials and ideas and effects that we're looking to achieve on the project. So whether it's the amphitheater seating on the top left there, that's kind of on that first segment, ways to cross grades, have people both be able to walk down them but sit in them, facilitate a lot of different seating styles so people can use them casually, people can, you know, play on them, people can sit on them, the wooden benches I mentioned, paving patterns, the canopy, the bridge, secondary stream crossings, just kind of a material palette and inspiration for where we were going. Building off of the geometry of the rail yard and kind of highlighting one of the areas, those seat walls, just because it does, if you were to look a little bit closer at the site plans, you'd see that kind of curved geometry of how those rail yards work. The seat benches are one of the, I think will be a signature feature. So this is just kind of showing a study, of what, you know, kind of what the intent, the design intent for these are, how they can be flexible, there can be multiples, they can grow and shrink, but they're all of a consistent design language. Next. Part of this project is in that first segment, talking about the short segment, east-west Folsom Street. Next. And so what this design suggests is capturing probably the north 10 feet or so of the street and reclaiming it for more pedestrian-focused uses. It was refinished or kind of redesigned recently. It is a nice street. It's a very has a high capacity, but it is really just focused on automobiles. And since we're looking to do placemaking, we anticipate this segment being the most kind of, it has the most adjacent businesses, the highest use. We thought by reclaiming a little bit, we could do, we could both plant trees, we could soften the edge, we could shade the parking lot. You can't quite see it in this rendering, but the intent is that underneath some of those trees, there are some small bioswales adjacent to the curb to do a little bit of stormwater mitigation there. And just by recapturing some of the asphalt, we can really retain as much of the functionality for parking for adjacent businesses, but also kind of meld that a little bit more with the intended pedestrian uses. Next. Yes. Right now, I'd say it's somewhat informal. It's very wide, it's very new, it's very well designed, but it is not striped in its current configuration.
There's an array of small businesses in there now, and they're they're looking forward to bringing people. And not only there's a well-known restaurateur and Rico, but there's other there's a statue maker in the area that sells statues nationally, and there's a coffee maker. I mean, there's an array of coffee roaster company there. There's an array of small businesses that are looking forward to this, and but the community as a whole, the expectations are high, and this is meeting the expectations, in my opinion.
Yeah, and thanks for that. That was just leading to my question about, the parking. You have it at 90 degrees instead of maybe at 45. If it was a one-way street, then to just park at 45 instead of the 90. Ease of travel in and out. But if it's a two-way street and the idea to keep it two ways, then that would be the way to go. But if you were intended to maybe do it one way, then do it at 45-degree angle parking. Just my 2 cents.
So this is just some cross sections kind of showing the comparison about how reclaiming a little bit of that asphalt could be used to the just vegetation, pedestrian focused amenities. Next. And then lastly, kind of an element that hasn't necessarily been designed but is intended to be incorporated and was kind of considered throughout the design is the public art realm. Some of this has already started. Some of it is just kind of projective, saying I think it makes sense to be incorporated into the design. Next. And what you see here is kind of 3 different types of art that we think could potentially enhance this project. The first are the murals, kind of the orange strips there. There's just a lot of blank facades backing up to this, and they just seem ripe for opportunities for public art. We could have a whole hour-long discussion on murals and public art, but that's kind of the idea. I do believe one of them through the Seven Canyon Trust on the west end, closer to 1000 West, is in the process or has already been completed. There are more along this corridor. The second is the street crossing art, just a way to kind of place make, to signify. Right now, as a part of the previous project, these crossings were very professionally designed. They're nice. They really give priority to the pedestrian, but they are a little. They don't really create identity. They're kind of forgettable when you pass them. And so, if we're trying to signify that this is an important segment of Folsom Trail, paint is very cheap, but it has large effects. We identified the crossings as areas where we could start to kind of brand this potentially. And then the last one there on the right side of the slide is in the blue, which is the dominant feature at the east end of this project is the major interstate overpass. And there is just a tremendous opportunity with pretty economic strategies such as paint and especially lighting to take that from something that's kind of infrastructural, maybe is a bit of a constraint, and turn it into a really dynamic highlighting part kind of at that end by the plaza. So we just see those as opportunities. And then next. This is the last slide of the deck. And yeah, just some ideas, just kind of inspirational ideas for those types of things where we think we could go beyond the design and use what's around, whether it's an underpass or the backsides of buildings, to just kind of bring the overall placemaking to another level. So that's all I have. Thanks a lot for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chair. Hi, Brad. How are you? What happens at the end, at the east end? Is there a, how do I get to it? And is there any thought about how to get over the train tracks in the future? I know that it's kind of an interesting, this is a different part. No, this is a different part of the thing. I'm serious. Like what, do I go down to First South and then walk up? What's the best way to get there?
Yeah. Are you able to go to slide 14 out of 23? Just the plaza slide. So yeah, that's a good question. As a part of the existing trail that was built, it's my understanding that significant time was spent on the pedestrian crossings of the rail. I don't think anybody ever loves the solutions. Very wide distance to cross, those things that are that just can't be changed. But there is now at the north end, there's a little white box and a little gray box. There's already a corral that causes you to zigzag, and then there's a gate kind of part of a new crossing system, and that was what was pre-existing. I think we were told that the amount of time and effort that went into working with the railroad on this crossing, and then just transportation in general on the crossing of the other streets, that it would be strongly preferred if we did not try to reimagine those, because they had already just been reconsidered prior to us starting this project.
So you go up to South Temple and then across.
So you basically go north across, and then you take a hard right, which would be east, and it picks up the rest of the trail.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
may I?
go ahead.
Triangle Park received funding, and I'm curious if that's been in consideration for how to better connect into our downtown and Rio Grande area.
Pardon me, what was the funding source?
Triangle Park. It's a project that received CIP funding, I believe it was.
It wasn't through the RDA, it was separate.
We just added it to the CIP as a project. Some of the neighbors, there is the Folsom Trail sort of connects to the future Triangle Park, which is on the other side of the trains. So obviously when we mention trains, I twitch, and I think many of us do. But I've been talking about trains and sort of a nauseum for many of my colleagues, and I will continue to do so. So I'll be warned. But the issues of trains are very complex, and you're right. There is paths to get to this location, but it's almost choose your own adventure because you never know what could happen. You could be stuck there for 45 minutes, and it is a very big problem, and there's a divide. But I'm looking forward to what this project is shaping up to be, and we definitely need to be looking at for funding to to some of the comments earlier today, but to reconnect the city what it needs to be connected, and there is projects out there, and very well-known projects that come up with ideas on how to remove this barrier, which is a big part of the train and those trains that stop. But
Mr. Chair, I did have a follow-up comment to the question that I asked. I think it's important, and the future of the rail obviously is something that that is a topic of discussion, but the current state of the rail I think is also something that we should consider and design around, and I think you have, but I would encourage not just the consultant but also us as a city to think about what goes past that, like walking across the rail, walking along South Temple, then walking across the rail again. There's some beautification that can happen along that route to get back toward the gateway area, and I can imagine that being maybe very different than what's been designed here, but something that connects directly into that deliberately and makes you feel a little bit more like you're invited to walk there. And then I think that one part where you were talking about that little part that goes under the overpass for a bit, that then becomes the one moment of pause within a pathway. So that's actually maybe the most the biggest opportunity. Of course, if the rail goes away and the realignment happens, that may change, but right now that's the one sort of place you stop, and you go to the High Line, and there's like the one place you stop and you look at the street below it. I can imagine that being a really interesting moment, and I would love for us to consider programming for that, the way that both us as a city but the community can also like own that space and what could happen there, and things that can be done, and the rest of the design is great and exciting, and I'm excited for it, but that to me seems like the biggest opportunity where we can not just have a path, but there's a place as well. So I guess the question of how you get in and how you leave is interesting to me, because there's actually a lot of real estate that you've drawn there, a lot of open space that you've drawn there that is not on that path. It's adjacent to, and that's cool to me. A great opportunity.
And you also mentioned the connecting, right? Feeling welcoming, and maybe to also your comment about the Triangle Park and how to connect these assets and make sure that people feel welcome to walk from one to another. So that's something to think more holistically, not only about the Folsom Trail and how amazing this is, and I love the project, by the way, but it is making sure that people from these other pieces, assets that we're building, also feel, driven, invited to participate. So, Board Member Petro.
I'd like to shift gears for a second. This is an example of the good things that the West Side deserves. This isn't just a functional thing. This is a beautiful thing. It's reconnecting us to nature. I love all of that. But as a check and a balance on us, this has got to reaffirm our commitment to creatively, innovatively, and proactively addressing the homelessness crisis. All of these spots where we want to daylight right now are currently under tents of people who have no place to be. The only thing I could think that would compound that would be to invest millions of dollars to repeatedly chase people off of there and to have waste products pouring into a river that is already imperiled because we exposed water in that area. And so I am incredibly enthusiastic about this. I think the design is beautiful, but I need us to understand comprehensively what it is for us to say we are enthusiastic about this. This is a commitment to making sure the community can enjoy this, and comprehensively it is a public space. I am not trying to say we should not displace anyone just because nice things are coming to the West Side, but we've got to have real homelessness solutions in place in order for this sort of investment to function the way it should for all Salt Lakers.
If I may add, Mr. Chair, and I agree with Councilmember Petro, I have seen many Latino fishermen out on that creek, so I consider our viability and our environmental remediation equally as important as the investments we have long-term here. So I'd appreciate if you consider that.
I just, the investments, and as well said, we need the investments, and we deserve these investments, and I'm looking forward to this project, and this is going beyond your conversation, but this is what we do all the time. But these open spaces, and this is a conversation as a board and as a council we're going to have to continue to be talking about, but is about how these spaces should be inviting to everyone, and they should be safe, and we deserve that, and there is something, there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that these spaces kept the expectations high, and I can see some neighbors telling me, well, you're going to do this, but then X, Y, and Z is going to happen, and why don't you solve X, Y, and Z first before you do that? And it is a very hard response. It is very, very hard to find a solution to this. But I think that as a board and as a council, and as administration, as a city, we're working very hard to try to mitigate this impacts. I'm looking forward to this big investment into this area. I had some good question that I forgot. Anybody else? Are we okay with this? Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm sure we're gonna have more thoughts, and the public. What is? I think I remember now. What is the timeline on some of these projects? I represent the area, and I hear a lot. I have meetings every so often in the area about the issues in the area, and many of the neighbors are very active and very involved in trying to improve the community. And many of the concerns is, what is the timeline? They want to see some trees planted. When is the first shovel? I'm sure some of the neighbors are going to come help out. Do we know when some of this is going to happen?
Yeah, so our Parks Department is currently, they have, I believe, $2 million to go towards some of the landscaping improvements along the trail. So they got that from the parks bond funding. So they're already working to execute that. And then our next steps is really to finalize these construction drawings, because right now they're preliminary drawings, and so we want to take them to 100% to be able to move forward with implementation. And we do need funding to complete the construction drawings. We kind of estimate about $1 million to do that. So our focus is on getting that funding and completing those construction plans, and then moving forward with implementation.
You needing $1 million for the drawing to finish the, okay.
Yeah.
And the RDA side.
That's our kind of rough estimate right now.
Yeah. And Parks Department already has some funding from the bond side to start
to do some of the landscaping.
That will be encouraging to some of the neighbors to hear that some of the pieces are already sort of happening or within the city. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, has the RDA used these conceptual drawings to get high-level construction budgets of the final design?
Yeah, so Bradley has he worked on completing the construction drawings. I don't know if you want to speak to that, or the preliminary construction drawings. So we have that.
Yeah, we, as a part of this, you're seeing kind of the graphic element of it, but part of our deliverables to the RDA were 40% design drawings, so there's a set there, and that was the basis for a preliminary cost estimate.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to consider both what can happen with that 2 million, is it 2 million that Parks Public Lands has? So. But also how that might be able to be used in temporary ways to sort of maybe temporary installations that help activate that area now and help inform the final use once full funding is received.
I think that's actually a very clever idea. I mean, it goes to, your board member Petro point. We need the activation in this area very badly. So I think that is something that will be very supportive to get some temporary uses, which might also help us keep on learning from the community on its uses. So, any other thoughts? Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate the presentation. Cannot wait until this becomes a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Brad.
Moving on to item 6, report and announcements from the executive director. No? Okay. Report and announcements from the RDA staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will steal the portion of time that the mayor had. We have quite a few updates we want to give you as a board, so I'm going to take that privilege. First of all, with regard to a couple project updates, the agency's notice of funding availability for our housing development loan program has closed. We received 20 applications with a funding request of over $36 million. You'll recall that we issued the NOFA for $13.7 million. That consisted of $9.5 million in HUD funds and then $4.2 million in RDA funds allocated for affordable housing development. So this is the first year. You recall that we were doing HUD funds. We will continue to work with staff in housing stability to make sure as we review those applications, the projects meet the HUD requirements. And over the next few weeks, those applications will be reviewed within the context of the program and the NOFA. We will then send those on to Finance Committee and return to you hopefully sometime in March at our March meeting with the recommendations for funding. So additionally, next update, staff also received 2 applications in the amount of $5.35 million for affordable housing developments for our high opportunity funds. So you'll recall that this is the $2.7 million that is remaining in those funds. Those 2 applications will also be reviewed, and we will return to the board after we take those through Finance Committee as well. Moving on to the Ballpark Next development, we have, following the straw poll and the allocation of funding from you as a board, we have released the RFP to assemble a design consultant team that will continue that project. reach out to new and existing groups of stakeholders with the intention of providing a shared vision for the success of the ballpark site. This vision will essentially create an urban design framework that we will then use for the future redevelopment, land uses, and programming of the property. That RFP closes on February 12th. Also, in terms of offerings, Salt Lake County is currently soliciting proposals for the development of the Sunday Anderson Senior Center within the 9-line project area. Thank you. You as a board allocated $2 million for the inclusion of affordable housing within that project. That has gone out with the caveat that at least 20% of the units must be affordable to households at 60% AMI, or that a portion of the homes must be sold at a price affordable to households at 80% AMI or less. So depending on the proposals selected, we may or may not have additional opportunities for financing to help fund any of the commercial, retail, childcare, or other uses that may be proposed in that project.
Danny?
That RFP closes February 22nd.
So it's not just, I was under probably a bad assumption. It doesn't just have to be senior housing. It can be any kind of housing.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. That's exciting.
I think the county would also obviously like to encourage senior housing, but I don't think they wanted to limit it to just that. Moving over to community updates, for anyone looking for something to do over the holidays, or not the holidays, over the rest of winter, Gallivan Center is sponsoring free dance nights in Gallivan Hall on Tuesday evening starting January 16th and running through May 14th. Your options include line dancing, swing, salsa, and ballroom dancing, otherwise known as all of the things I should never do in public. But those details will be posted every week on the website, and feel free to participate in that. Last but not least, if you know Talitha Day, she's the director of the Gallivan Center.
Danny? Sorry,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Still hoping we can add roller skating to that list someday.
Yeah, roller skating will happen this summer. Yes, we are ordering the skates as we speak. Well, not
Yeah,
literally
no,
as we speak, but it's in process.
Well, one at a time.
Okay. No way to see that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Talitha Day, Gallivan Center Director, is retiring this week after 23 years with the city. If you know Talitha, you know that she has a very one-of-a-kind personality and has been the heart and soul of Gallivan Center for over the last 20 years. Her dedication is unrivaled. So we will miss her, wish her the best of luck. We hope that despite her threats that she won't come back, that she will continue to feel comfortable and share her opinion on an ongoing basis. But hopefully she can enjoy her retirement. Mr. Chair, that's all the updates we have unless there are questions.
We know when something has an impact on your life when you start getting teary-eyed.
Yes, thank you. Worked with Talitha 20 years ago is when I started, so.
Thank you.
We know each other well.
Any thoughts, any questions beyond the roller skating?
Mm-hmm.
Are you a roller skater?
Aspiring.
Okay. Good to know.
I can't do any of the other things on the list, so I thought I'd maybe add something.
But there are
and try
classes, you know, there are dance classes. We learn.
Who has the time?
Okay, fair. Thank you so much for the updates. Any Vice Chair? Any?
Just one comment for Danny and your staff. Nice job on the audit. I appreciate that. That's all because you guys are doing a nice job. And
I have to defer that thanks to the finance department. Our financial analyst, Aaron Cunningham, works with Mike Burns in the finance department to help with that. But a lot of that heavy lifting is finance staff, and we thank them for the time that they put to that. So thank you.
I appreciate everybody on the presentations and their work today. So we're moving on.
Thank you.
There is no written briefings. There is also no consent agenda. There is a closed session, and I need a motion. There is highlighted pieces on that motion. Please, someone help me out.
Mr. Chair.
I move that.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I move that we enter into closed session for the purposes of discussing real estate purchase, acquisition, or lease, and advice of counsel.
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member Mano and a second by Board Member Wharton. Any discussion on that motion?
Katie has something.
Council Chair, or sorry, Board Chair, could you also add in disposition of real property?
Oh, sorry, I thought I said that. All the things I said plus disposition of real property.
And re-second.
Re-second.
Okay, we have an amended motion and a second amended as well. Any discussion? Are we doing okay? Okay, Board Member Mano,
Yes.
Board Member Lopez Chavez,
Aye.
Board Member Young,
Aye.
Board Member Wharton,
Yes.
Board Member Dugan,
Yes.
Board Member Petro.
Aye.
I am a aye, and this is a unanimous motion, so we're going to close the meeting. Thank you, everyone. When are we coming back? Board Member Chair?
Oh, yeah. I think we're scheduled at 4:15. That seems like enough time.
4:15. Okay,
We'll
thank
plan
you.
on 4:15.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just confirm that RDA will be adjourned following the closed session
I'm not
and will return only as work session, correct?
That's
Thank
correct. Thank you. We need some like closing music, I think. We need it. Where's the gal?
At least we can stay in this room.
I know. This is nice.